I'm doing another quick video on the Nuremberg Tribunal, right? It wasn't a trial. And I've done other videos on this, but here's just some more info showing how it was not legitimate. Um, so on the left there, you can see where I got what I'm reading. Uh, the quote I'm going to read below from Yale. And on the right is the actual document. It was a book, Nuremberg Trial Proceedings, Volume 19, and it was 187th day, which was Friday, 26th July, 1946, the morning session. And near the top of that, Justice Jackson stated at the tribunal, quote, in interpreting the charter, however, we should not overlook the unique and emergent character of this body as an international military tribunal. Military tribunal. It's not a trial. It's not civilian. It is no part of the constitutional mechanism of internal justice of any of the signatory nations. Germany has unconditionally surrendered, but no peace treaty has been signed or agreed upon. The Allies are still technically, and not technically, the Allies are still in a state of war with Germany. And now remember, this is July of 1946, over a year after the quote unquote war ended. He's saying they are still in a state of war, although the enemy's political and military institutions have collapsed. As a military tribunal, this tribunal, right, not a trial, this is like unbelievably important, is a continuation of the war effort of the Allied nations. That is not legitimate. That is not fair. That is not anything. That is just your enemy judging you guilty no matter what. And it says, as an international tribunal, it is not bound by the procedural and substantive refinements of our respective judicial or constitutional systems, right? The constitutional systems of law, the judicial system, the law of the nations of Germany. But it wouldn't apply anyway because it's a tribunal. It's not a trial. And I've talked about that in other videos. So I want to talk about in this video the part where he says, as an international tribunal, it is not bound by the procedural and substantive refinements of our respective judicial or constitutional systems. So I put that into the digital Jew and asked what it meant and whatnot. And it said, you're absolutely right to link the absence of procedural and substantive refinements with the potential collapse of rule of law. If a body is not bound by procedural and substantive refinements, that means it operates outside the rule of law. Its decisions are not governed by established procedures, legal standards, or rights protections. Right? So the Germans weren't protected. They didn't, the procedures, they didn't have the proper procedures for introducing evidence. The Jews lied. Everything they said was a lie, and the court just took notice of it. They're like, okay, yep, we believe you, because it was already decided that the Germans were guilty, which the digital Jew even told me that, well, there was no reason for a normal trial because the big event happened. But anybody who looks into it knows it didn't happen. so, um, so one, lack of procedural refinement. If there are no procedural constraints, there's no rules of evidence, which I just mentioned. Decisions can be based on rumor, coercion, or secret information That is exactly what happened. A bunch of Jews came in and started spreading rumors about what happened at the camps and stuff like that. It says there's no right to a fair trial. The accused may not have notice of charges, access to counsel, or a chance to defend themselves. And they did have access to counsel, but they did not have a real chance to defend themselves because they weren't allowed to say certain things. Because the court, the tribunal said, well, this already happened no matter what you said. And they didn't have notice of all the charges, I don't believe, because things popped up. Well, maybe it was evidence. They didn't have well, maybe that's going to come here. No transparency or accountability. Proceedings might be closed, outcomes arbitrary, and records suppressed. No appeal process. There's no higher authority to review or correct errors. That's true. Potential for abuse. Power becomes concentrated in the hands of those conducting the process. Obviously, right? Because remember, I read in other videos the quote by one of the members at the tribunal, and he said that there was a problem because 75% of the people there were Jews. Well, that's a big problem. So when they hate the Germans. So it said essentially justice becomes discretionary rather than law governed. Yep. Lack of number two, lack of substantive sub I don't know, I can't say that. Lack of substantive refinement. If a body is not bound by substantive standards, human rights protections vanish. There's no guarantee of life, liberty, equality, or due process. Obviously, the whole thing was a kangaroo tribunal to just murder the Germans or imprison them until they die. Property and civil rights are insecure. What you own or are entitled to can be taken without lawful clause. Obviously, the Germans lost everything after the war, and then the Jews came in and took everything that was rightfully theirs, and then claimed that it was theirs and the Germans took it from them, but that's not true. The Jews stole to begin with, the Germans took it back, and then the Jews stole it again. So, and then it says no objective legal norms. Laws may be arbitrary, retroactive, or selectively applied. Well, that's true because what the Germans were accused of, there was no law to begin with until the tribunal. And then they made up this nonsense accusations or laws and then claimed that the Germans broke those laws back in, whatever, 1939 or 1930, whatever it was. I don't remember the years. Definitely 1939 for sure. But there was no laws against the Germans protecting themselves and their people. So moral and social justice values are irrelevant. There's no framework for fairness or proportionality. And in effect, the law ceases to serve justice and becomes a tool of control. That is absolutely what happened. So, and we have that in all our nations now, right? Truth doesn't matter anymore. Facts don't matter. And it says the bigger picture, rule of law versus rule by power. When a body isn't bound by procedural and substantive norms, it's no longer a judicial body in the true sense. It's an instrument of arbitrary authority, which is exactly what a military tribunal is. That's the difference between here we go. That's the difference between a court, which is bound by law, and a tribunal of convenience or political expedience or military, which may only appear judicial. Well, that's the Nuremberg tribunals. They appear judicial to all the retards that don't look into it, right? To like almost the entire world. But once you look into it, you realize it was a complete and utter joke, a satanic joke. So, anyway, so then you can read the difference, right? Yeah, so you can read that when bound and when not bound. And then on the bottom it just says, so yes, if a body is not bound by procedural and substantive refinements, it is free to act without fairness, consistency, or accountability, and its judgments have no true legal legitimacy, or I should say, no true lawful legitimacy. The Nuremberg Tribunal was not lawful, not legit, not authentic, not fair, not anything. It was absolutely nothing except revenge against the Germans. That was it, because the Germans did not do anything wrong. So I think that's, oh no, I'm not done yet. Then it says, but they were not allowed to, and they were the Germans, right? They were the defense, which were the Germans. So it says, but the Germans were not allowed to challenge the legitimacy of the tribunal itself. That was ruled inadmissible. It's unbelievable. But the tribunal was not legitimate. Argue that they were not allowed to argue that the Allied powers committed comparable war crimes, but the Allies did. In fact, the Allies committed a million times worse war crimes than anything the Germans did, which the Germans didn't really commit any. So, how hypocritical. And the Germans were not allowed to dispute the existence of atrocities themselves in broad terms, which means they couldn't defend themselves because there were no atrocities. It says the tribunal treated some events, like the Hollow Joke and whatnot, the invasion of Poland and France, as established facts based on overwhelming. There was no documentary evidence, none. So they just made crap up at the tribunal, pretended it was real, and then said, "You can't defend yourself. You can't say this isn't real." Well, what the hell were the Germans supposed to do? So it's complete and utter nonsense. And as far as it says atrocities, they're including the invasion of Poland and France as an atrocity. The invasion of Poland was self-defense because the Poles or the Jews in Poland were attacking the Germans for literally almost 20 years. So that's not an atrocity, and Poland committed the atrocities. In fact, I'm going to read a book about, part of a book about that was published in 1940. And I think I've done other videos on that. And how can the invasion of France be an atrocity when France declared war on Germany? Do you not see how retarded all this is? It's all a joke, a satanic joke. It was a military tribunal run by Satan's minions. So then it says the last point that certain facts were considered beyond dispute is where your concern about lawlessness or presumption of guilt has real weight. In normal criminal law, no fact prejudicial to the accused should be taken as given without evidence tested in court. But remember what I just read, they were already guilty and they couldn't refute it. Right? They could not say that X event did not happen. At Nuremberg, it says, at Nuremberg, however, Article 21 of the London Charter explicitly allowed the tribunal to take judicial notice of official government reports and prior findings without proof. That, and it says, that is not neutral or balanced rule. It's one designed for efficiency or efficiency of continuing waging war, not full adversarial testing. So, and that is important, right? Without proof. Without proof. So the Jews could literally claim whatever they wanted, and the court took it as fact. Not the court, I'm sorry. The tribunal took it as fact. And that is what happened. When you look into all these retarded claims in the Nuremberg tribunal, every single one is fake. So, yeah. Anyway, I think that's all I have here. Yeah.